"Don't you dare speak," she hissed, and ripped the speech from my hands, my own daughter, my foundation, my moment, gone. Then, louder, into the microphone I had already turned on, she announced to the board that I was confused, unfit, and that the land I'd planned to gift as my legacy was being sold for greater liquidity. And the worst part, they believed her. Old friends, my lawyer, people I built this town with, sitting in silence, nodding along. But Claire forgot one thing. I keep originals, dates, signatures, paper trails. The microphone caught her lies. Now the clock's ticking, and I will speak. My name is Walter Denning, and I'm 75 years old. Each morning, I sit at my oak dining table drinking coffee and reviewing business records, while the kitchen clock marks time with gentle clicks. My late wife Sarah taught me the value of keeping things in order, and my daughter, Claire, our only child, used to admire that trait in me. The familiar weight of my wedding band reminds me of simpler days before Sarah's passing 3 years ago. Claire, who now serves as the Foundation's executive director, has grown distant, scheduling meetings without telling me, losing paperwork I need to sign. My fingers trace the brass key in my pocket, knowing my fireproof box holds every original document, every ledger, every board, minute I've saved across 40 years of business. But let me start from the beginning. The Foundation's annual board meeting always fell on the first Tuesday in October. I'd picked the date myself years ago, when autumn light still warmed the maple trees outside our community center. This morning, though, felt different. Maybe it was the way the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting that institutional glare across the polished podium. Or maybe it was how Claire had positioned herself in the front row, leaning close to whisper with board members about streamlining and efficiency. Words that made my spine stiffen. You know that feeling when something's about to go wrong? Like static before a storm? That's what prickled through me as I settled into my usual chair, patting the folded speech in my breast pocket. I'd typed it up carefully the night before, just 1 page, double-spaced, about donating the Riverside property as my retirement gift to the community. Simple and clear, the way good business should be. The familiar faces in the audience helped steady my nerves. There was Tom Henderson, who'd worked maintenance at my hardware store for 30 years, sitting next to his wife Martha, and Ellen Chen, my first employee when we opened back in '72. Even Richard Barnes, the attorney who'd handled all our foundation paperwork since day one, had shown up. Good people who'd watched this town grow alongside me. "You remember the river property, don't you?" I'd practiced saying to them. "Where Sarah and I used to take Claire fishing." The memory of those Sunday afternoons with dragonflies skimming the water and Claire's small hands wrapped around her bamboo pole still brought warmth to my chest. That land deserved to stay special for other families, too. I ran through my opening lines again while the chair worked through standard business, budget reports, committee updates, the usual drone of non-profit procedure that Sarah had always handled so gracefully. The red power light on the microphone caught my eye, steady and waiting like a sentinel. "Next on our agenda," the chair announced, shuffling his papers, "we have a special presentation from our founder, Walter Denning." My knees creaked a bit as I stood. Age'll do that to you. But my steps toward the lectern were firm. I'd built this foundation from the ground up, after all, led these meetings for decades. The microphone's foam windscreen brushed against my lip as I adjusted its height, and I could feel Claire's eyes boring into me from the front row. The speech felt crisp between my fingers as I unfolded it. 3 sentences into my mental rehearsal, I heard the sharp click of heels against linoleum. Claire was rising from her seat, her face set in that tight smile I'd grown to dread since Sarah passed. "Dad," she said, too loudly for a whisper, but too soft for the microphone to catch. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I kept my eyes on the typed page, on the words I'd chosen so carefully. "Making an announcement about the Riverside property," I replied evenly. As we discussed, the fluorescent buzz seemed to grow louder as Claire took another step forward. In that moment, I noticed how the morning light through the high windows caught her pearl necklace. Sarah's pearls, actually. The ones I'd given my wife on our 20th anniversary. The ones Claire had borrowed last Christmas and somehow forgotten to return. "The property discussion isn't on today's agenda," Claire said, her voice carrying that false brightness she used when telling me I'd misplaced something or forgotten a conversation. "Why don't you let me handle this part?" The microphone picked up my slow inhale. 20 faces watched us, waiting. My fingers pressed against the paper's smooth edges as Claire moved closer to the podium, her hand extended like she was approaching a startled animal. That's when I saw it, the glint in her eyes. The same look she'd had as a teenager when I caught her forging Sarah's signature on a permission slip. Only this time there was something harder behind it, something that made me grip my speech tighter and lean closer to the microphone. Claire's manicured hands slapped against the wooden lectern, making the microphone squeal. My own grip tightened on my speech, but before I could lean in to speak, she was there, right in my space, close enough that I caught a whiff of that expensive perfume Sarah never would have approved of. "Don't you dare speak," she hissed, her fingers clamping around my notes. The paper tore as she yanked it away, the sound sharp as a thunderclap in the hushed room. You ever have a moment when time seems to stop, when everything moves in slow motion, but your mind stays crystal clear? That's how it felt watching my own daughter step between me and that microphone, watching her smooth her jacket like she was about to close a sale. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Claire's voice boomed through the speakers, "I need to address something difficult." She paused, dabbing at her eye with a tissue I hadn't seen her pull out. "My father, well, he's been becoming increasingly confused lately." The microphone picked up my sharp intake of breath. Tom Henderson shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by his shoelaces. Ellen Chen, who'd helped me balance books for 30 years, couldn't meet my eyes. "Leadership requires decisive youth," Claire continued, her voice thick with fake concern. "Fresh perspectives. As acting director, I've reviewed our assets, and the Riverside property represents an unprecedented opportunity. Instead of locking it away as a park," she gave a delicate laugh, "we'll be listing it for sale. The greater liquidity will allow us to explore more dynamic investments." The room fell dead silent. Even the usual shuffle of papers stopped. Richard Barnes, our attorney, stared at his notepad like it held the secrets of the universe. I could see his pen tapping, tap, 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 against the yellow legal paper, but he didn't look up. Not once. The microphone cable swayed between us, that red power light still burning bright. My chest felt like it was caught in a vice, but my mind started clicking like an old cash register, tallying up details. The way Claire's hand trembled slightly when she mentioned the sale, the careful placement of her allies in the front row, the tissue that appeared too quickly to be spontaneous. I opened my mouth to speak, but Claire's voice crashed through the speakers again. "I know this is hard for everyone, change always is, but we have to think about the Foundation's future, not cling to outdated ideas." My tongue felt like lead, but I forced myself to swallow, to breathe, to stand straight despite the weight of 24 pairs of eyes watching for signs of the collapse Claire had promised them. Martha Henderson's knitting needles clicked in the third row, the only person still moving, her fingers working yarn like nothing had changed. Like my daughter hadn't just branded me confused and incompetent in front of half the town. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and somewhere in the back of the room, an air conditioning unit kicked on with a rattle. Such normal sounds for such an abnormal moment. I thought of my fireproof box at home, filled with 30 years of careful records, of the property deeds Sarah and I had signed together, locked away in my study drawer, of Claire's signature on Foundation documents going back to her first board position, every stroke of her pen catalogued and dated. "So," Claire said, her smile bright as a knife's edge, "shall we move on to the next item of business?" The chair, Bill Mitchell, who'd played poker with me every Thursday for 15 years, cleared his throat and shuffled his papers. He didn't look at me either, just nodded and said, "Yes, let's continue with the agenda." I stood there, my empty hands resting on the lectern, feeling the eyes of the room slide away from me like water off glass. They were waiting for tears, for confusion, for some outburst that would prove Claire right. Instead, I straightened my tie, adjusted my cuffs, and counted my breaths the way Sarah had taught me during her last hospital stay. You know that nightmare where you're back in school and everyone's whispering about you, but you can't quite catch what they're saying? That's what it felt like as I made my way down the center aisle of our foundation hall. Only this wasn't a dream, and I wasn't waking up. Starting to slip floated from somewhere to my left. Age catches up with everyone. Drifted from the right. The words confused and unfit bounced around the room like loose change on tile, each clink making me flinch. Ellen Chen, my trusted bookkeeper for 3 decades, actually stepped backward when I approached her chair. The movement was small, almost unconscious, but it spoke volumes. Tom. Henderson cleared his throat. Walt, maybe you should head home, get some rest. He patted my shoulder like I was some doddering uncle at Thanksgiving who'd had too much wine. The same Tom who'd borrowed my socket wrench set last month and talked cars with me for an hour. The parking lot was worse. Small clusters of board members huddled between their cars, voices dropping to whispers as I passed. The spring air carried fragments of their conversations. Always seemed so sharp. Claire must be devastated. Thank goodness she caught it in time. I sat in my Buick, hands gripping the wheel, watching the dashboard clock tick from 9:45 to 10:15. The last time I'd felt this hollow was when Sarah's doctor had said terminal. At least then I'd had Claire beside me holding my hand. Now, the next morning my phone buzzed with neighborhood chat notifications. I usually ignored them. They're mostly lost pets and complaints about garbage collection. But Margaret down the street had posted, "Prayers for the Denning family during this difficult transition. Sometimes the hardest part of loving our parents is protecting them from themselves." 17 sympathetic responses, 3 sad face emojis, 1 heart from Claire herself. My hands shook as I dialed the bank. "Good morning. This is Walter Denning. I'd like to confirm my account balances." "Of course, Mr. Denning." The teller's voice was professional, but there was something in her tone, something careful. "I see you've authorized Ms. Claire Denning as a co-signer on all accounts as of yesterday morning." I hadn't. The foundation office was next. "Hello, Sandra. Could you email me the board packets from the last 6 months? I seem to have misplaced my copies." The silence on the line stretched just a beat too long. "Oh, Mr. Denning." Sandra's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Ms. Claire consolidated all communications last week. She said it would be less confusing this way. I'm supposed to direct all inquiries through her now. Sandra, who brought me coffee every morning when I still kept office hours. Sandra, who showed me pictures of her grandkids and asked my advice about their college funds." I set the phone down, carefully, like it might shatter. The morning sun slanted through my kitchen window, catching the brass key to my fireproof box. "Sarah had given me that box on our 20th anniversary. Because you love your paperwork more than me," she'd teased. If she could see what was happening now. The mail truck's brake squeal pulled me back to the present. Through the window, I watched our regular carrier, Joe, stuff something into my box. When I retrieved it, my stomach clenched. A heavy cream envelope hand-addressed by Claire's paralegal marked "Urgent, Personal and Confidential." I held it, feeling its weight. Inside would be papers, carefully typed, legally binding. Papers that would try to finish what Claire had started in that meeting room. Papers meant to erase 30 years of building something honest and true, replacing it with whispers and doubt and false concern. The envelope seemed to pulse in my hands, like a living thing. I thought of Claire as a little girl sitting at this very kitchen table, practicing her signature over and over until it was perfect. "Just like yours, Daddy," she'd said proudly. Now she was using that same careful hand to sign away my voice, my reputation, my legacy. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Sarah's lemon oil still scented the oak table. And somewhere in my daughter's office, she was probably watching her own clock, waiting for me to open this envelope and crumble. I set it down unopened, reached instead for my phone to call the one person who might still be in my corner, Sarah's brother George, the retired detective who'd always said Claire was too smooth by half. My finger hovered over his number as the morning sun warmed my back. I took a deep breath and slit open the cream envelope. 2 stacks of papers slid onto my kitchen table, one topped with Claire's paralegal's letterhead, the other bearing the county court's seal. My coffee mug slipped from my fingers, splattering dark drops across the pristine pages. Power of attorney. I'd never signed any such thing, but there it was, dated 3 months ago, my signature flowing across the bottom line in perfect, familiar strokes. Too perfect, too familiar. The court document was worse, a notice of hearing scheduled exactly 30 days from today. Claire's petition to formalize the property transfer would be heard at 9 a.m. sharp in courtroom 3. My hands weren't quite steady as I pulled the kitchen calendar off its nail. The red marker squeaked as I drew a thick circle around that date. Beneath it, I started a list. The phone rang, making me jump. Claire's name lit up the display. "Dad?" Her voice dripped honey-sweet concern. "I just wanted to check on you. You seemed upset at the meeting." "Did I?" I kept my tone neutral, like we were discussing the weather. "Everyone understands, you know. You've carried so much responsibility for so long. It's time to rest. Let others handle the burden." She paused. "I've arranged for everything to transition smoothly. All you need to do is focus on staying safe and comfortable. Safe and comfortable, like a child's teddy bear, tucked away in storage." "That's thoughtful of you," I said, watching the kitchen clock tick. Each click seemed louder than the last. "The foundation board completely supports this move. They've seen how stressed you've been lately." Another careful pause. "I only want what's best for you, Dad. You know that, right?" Every word was a careful step in her dance, leading me toward the edge of a cliff I was supposed to walk off willingly. I could hear the trap in her gentle tone, the steel beneath the silk. "Of course, sweetheart." I matched her performance note for note. "I'll think about everything you've said." After we hung up, I pulled out the small brass key Sarah had given me all those years ago. The fireproof box sat in its usual spot under my desk, solid and reassuring. Inside, decades of careful record-keeping waited in manila folders, each one labeled in my precise handwriting. I lifted out the one marked Property Deed Original, just as someone knocked at the front door. Through the window, I saw another courier van idling in my driveway. The clock kept ticking, steady as a metronome, counting down my 30 days. But I'd learned something in my 75 years. Time moves differently when you're afraid than when you're angry. And right now, watching another official envelope arrive to strip away another piece of my life, I wasn't afraid anymore. I opened the door to sign for whatever new document Claire had sent to cage me. The real papers, the true ones, waited in their folder behind me. And somewhere across town, my daughter sat in her office, probably checking her own calendar, counting down the days until the father she thought she'd silenced would fade quietly away. The delivery man held out his clipboard. "Signature here, please, Mr. Denning." The courier's envelope held an invitation, cream-colored cardstock with Claire's flowing script. "Sunday family supper, 6 p.m. The paper was heavy, expensive. The kind you use when you're staging a performance, not planning a casual meal. You know those moments when you can see the trap but have to walk into it anyway? This was one of those. I straightened my tie in the hallway mirror that Sunday evening, hearing Sarah's voice in my head. "A gentleman shows up properly dressed even when he knows he's walking into trouble." The silver at my temples caught the light, and I smoothed it carefully. Claire always did like to comment on how much grayer I was getting lately. Her house gleamed under the early evening sun, windows polished, lawn manicured, everything camera-ready. I'd helped her choose this place 10 years ago, back when she still asked for my advice instead of my silence. My cousin Robert's car was already in the driveway next to Claire's Mercedes. Perfect. An audience. Claire opened the door with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Dad, you're right on time." She raised her voice slightly. "I'm so glad you felt well enough to drive yourself." The roast chicken smell drifted from her kitchen, mixing with lemon furniture polish and fresh flowers. Everything calculated, down to the cents. "Wouldn't miss it, sweetheart." I kept my voice steady, pleasant. The same tone I'd used in 1,000 business meetings where the stakes were high, and the other party thought they held all the cards. Robert and his wife Susan sat in the living room, perched on Claire's white sofa like awkward birds. Their smiles were too bright, too careful. "Uncle Walter," Susan started, then faltered. Claire swooped in with glasses of wine. "Dad's doctor says he should stick to water now, with his medication." "What medication?" But I just nodded, accepting the water glass. Every denial would only reinforce her story. "Dinner's ready," Claire announced. "Dad, let me help you." "I can manage fine," I said, following them to the dining room. The table settings could have graced a magazine cover. Claire had always inherited her mother's eye for detail, if not her heart. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Claire dominated naturally, each story carefully chosen, each pause perfectly timed. "Remember when Dad tried to pay his gardener twice last month?" She laughed, slicing her chicken. Thank goodness I caught that before it went through. I hadn't tried to pay anyone twice, but Robert and Susan exchanged that look, the one that said they were filing away another piece of evidence. The foundation board has been so understanding, Claire continued, reaching over to pat my hand. I felt my fingers twitch. Everyone agrees it's time for fresh energy, new perspectives. Dad's done so much already. He deserves to rest. How are the new property arrangements coming along? Robert asked, between bites of roasted potatoes. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. Robert had been on my Christmas card list for 40 years. Now he was checking on Claire's progress like a shareholder at a quarterly meeting. Everything's proceeding smoothly, Claire beamed. Dad's been a bit confused about some of the details, but that's perfectly normal at his age. The important thing is that he's safe. His assets are protected, and he doesn't have to worry anymore. I set my fork down carefully. Actually, I'd love to review those new arrangements. Could you share copies of the recent filings? Claire's smile never wavered. Oh, Dad, don't worry. I've already handled all of that. You just focus on enjoying your dinner. She turned to Susan. He gets so anxious about paperwork lately. The doctor says it's best if we keep things simple. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of meaningful glances and carefully crafted concern. I ate slowly, memorizing every phrase, every implied accusation wrapped in loving tones. The dining room had become Claire's stage, and she was giving the performance of her life. The sodium streetlights cast orange pools on the pavement as I drove home. Each intersection felt like another social connection being severed, another person who would believe Claire's version of reality. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the weight of it sat heavy in my chest. Inside, the house felt too quiet. The mantel clock chimed 9, each strike echoing off the empty walls. I was reaching for my evening crossword when the phone rang. The number on the display made me pause. I hadn't seen those digits flash across my phone in months. The phone's ring seemed to hang in the air. I hadn't seen my brother-in-law Frank's number since Margaret's funeral 8 months ago. He'd been the steady one in her family, the accountant who could spot a decimal point out of place at 50 paces. I picked up on the third ring. Frank? Walter. His voice was gravel-rough, like always. Claire came to see me today, wanted my signature on some foundation papers. My grip tightened on the receiver. And? Didn't sign a damn thing. A pause. Something's not right here, Walt. Paper trails don't lie. The knot in my chest loosened slightly. Frank had always been a man of few words, but everyone carried weight. Meet me at Jerry's diner tomorrow, he said. 7 a.m. Bring your records, the ones Claire doesn't know about. I thought of my fireproof box upstairs. I'll be there. The diner's neon sign was already humming when I pulled into the lot the next morning. Frank's brown sedan sat in his usual spot, third space from the door. Some habits never changed. Inside, the coffee steam and fluorescent glare on Formica brought back 100 business breakfasts. Frank had claimed his regular booth, yellow legal pad already centered on the tabletop. 2 coffee cups waited, black for him, cream for me, just like Margaret used to fix it. Sit down, Walt. Frank clicked his pen. Let's talk strategy. I slid into the booth, the vinyl cushions squeaking beneath me. Strategy? You've got 30 days before that hearing. He drew a neat line down the middle of his pad. Time to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start building your case. The waitress topped off our coffees. I watched the steam curl up, remembering how Margaret used to say her brother could smell financial fraud like other people smelled burning toast. Frank's pen moved in precise strokes. First column, what we need. Deeds, board minutes, bank statements. Full set of notary logs. Every courier slip from the last year. He looked up. You still keeping those transaction binders? Everyone since '82. I managed a small smile. Plus the fireproof box with all the originals. Good man. He nodded, adding another line. Second column, who handles what? I'll pull the court records, run every filing she's made. You compile your originals. We'll need them for side-by-side comparison. The morning crowd was filtering in, but Frank's booth felt like an island of purpose. His pen kept moving, sketching out timelines and document lists with mechanical precision. The key, he said, underlining a final line. Twice is proving the voice was stolen, on paper. The pen pressed deep, leaving a groove in the page. Every signature, every date, every deviation from procedure. We build it step by step. I watched his pen dig that line deeper. What if? No what ifs. Frank's eyes, so much like Margaret's, met mine. "You've got the records. I've got the expertise. Claire has—" He paused. "Claire has arrogance. She thinks you're beaten. Let her think that." The diner's clock ticked past 8. Frank tore the yellow sheet free, folded it with crisp corners. "Start with the property deeds," he said, passing me the page. "Pull every document where your signature appears. I'll see you back here tomorrow, same time." I tucked the folded paper into my jacket pocket. It felt like a map leading home. "Frank," I hesitated. "Why are you helping me?" He gathered his coat, dropped cash for the coffee. "Because Margaret knew who you were, and paper trails don't lie." He picked up his briefcase. 7 a.m. tomorrow, don't be late." I watched him stride out to his car, straight-backed as ever. The yellow page crinkled in my pocket, a battle plan written in Frank's precise hand. For the first time since the foundation meeting, the weight in my chest felt more like determination than defeat. The next 2 days turned into a grid of paper and purpose. Do you ever notice how detective work in the movies always happens in dark rooms with dramatic lighting? Real investigation is fluorescent bulbs and coffee rings on manila folders. I cleared my dining room table, the one Margaret and I had picked out 30 years ago, and transformed it into Command Central. Every surface held a timeline. Every chair balanced a stack of records. Frank worked methodically, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose as he photographed notary stamps with his phone's camera. "Document everything," he'd said. "Leave no paper unturned." I stapled receipts to calendar pages, creating a paper trail that even Claire couldn't dismiss. My fingers remembered the old accounting habits: date, amount, purpose, file. Some skills stick with you, like riding a bike or tying your shoes, or recognizing your own signature. Got the certified copies coming from Thompson's office, I told Frank around noon. James Thompson had handled the original property deed transfer back in '95. Good lawyer, careful with details. Said he'll have them here by 4. Frank grunted acknowledgement, still focused on his phone's screen. He'd been comparing notary stamps for hours, muttering numbers under his breath. I was halfway through a stack of mortgage papers when Frank's chair scraped back. "Walter," his voice had that same tone Margaret used when she'd caught someone's math not adding up. "Look at this." He handed me his phone. On the screen was the state notary database entry for the date on Claire's power of attorney. The ID number didn't match the stamp on our copy. Not even close. "Could be a typo," I said, but my hands had gone cold. Frank shook his head. "Check the formatting. State changed their notary ID system in 2019. This format." He tapped the POA document. "This shouldn't exist on a document from last month. You know that moment when puzzle pieces suddenly snap together? When the picture you didn't want to see becomes crystal clear?" I pulled out my old mortgage papers, the ones with signatures I knew were mine, laid them next to Claire's POA. The differences jumped out like neon signs. My real signature had a fluid motion, especially in the G of my middle name. But this one, I traced it with my finger, had odd stops and starts. The G loop looked cramped, forced. "Here," Frank handed me a magnifying glass he'd brought. "Look at the pen pressure points." Under magnification, I could see where the pen had lifted, hesitated. My hand never did that, not in 40 years of signing documents. Frank circled the worst spots with a red pen, his strokes precise. Above the largest circle he wrote, "Forged," in neat block letters. The question mark seemed unnecessary. I glanced at the calendar on my wall. 22 days until the hearing. The kitchen clock's tick felt louder, like it was counting down instead of just keeping time. "We need an expert," Frank said, already pulling up his phone's browser. "Licensed forensic document examiner. Someone who can testify." My hands shook slightly as I gathered the sample signatures. Each one went into a clear plastic sleeve, labeled with date and source. Frank found 3 examiners with court experience and helped me draft a cover letter explaining the urgency. "Overnight everything," he insisted. "We can't waste a day." I packaged it all carefully: original POA copy, mortgage samples, notary documentation. Added my business card with a note about the hearing date. The courier was scheduled for 5 p.m. pickup. At 4:58, my email pinged with the courier confirmation. The package was on its way to a Dr. Sarah Chen, forensic document specialist. 22 days left to prove what I already knew in my gut. Claire hadn't just stolen my voice, she'd forged my hand to do it. Frank gathered his coat around 5:30. Same time tomorrow? I nodded, still staring at the empty spot where the evidence package had been. Frank, what if... What did I say about what ifs? He patted my shoulder. Evidence first, worry later. After he left, I sat at my cleared dining room table, surrounded by the paper trail of my life. The clock ticked in the kitchen. Somewhere across town, a courier was carrying proof of my daughter's betrayal to a stranger who might help me prove it. The next morning, Frank brought his laptop and a thermos of coffee that could have stripped paint. Online banking's changed since your day, he said, logging into the secure portal. But money still leaves footprints. I'd seen those footprints before back when I was running the business. You'd be amazed how many people think nobody notices a missing decimal point or an extra zero. The smell of Frank's industrial-strength coffee brought back memories of late nights catching inventory shrinkage, tracking every penny until the numbers sang. Ready? Frank positioned his reading glasses. I'll read the transactions. You check them against the foundation records. I spread my ledgers and board minutes across the table. Start with March. March 15th. Wire transfer to Coastal Holdings LLC. 50,000 even. My pen froze. Not one of our regular vendors. April 3rd, same company, 75,000. I flipped through the board packets Claire had actually shared. Here, April meeting agenda. She pushed through a motion for temporary liquidity measures, said we needed operating cash. Operating cash that went straight to a shell company? Frank's eyebrows lifted. Let's see who owns Coastal Holdings. While he typed, I remembered Claire's voice at that meeting. So reasonable, so concerned about cash flow optimization. The foundation had healthy reserves. I'd made sure of that. We never needed emergency liquidity. Got it. Frank turned his screen. Coastal Holdings LLC registered 2 months before the first transfer. Guess who signed as managing member? The name jumped out. Claire Denning-Voss. You ever have that moment when anger feels like ice in your veins? When you're so furious you go completely calm? Print everything, I said. Frank's printer hummed. I grabbed my highlighter, marking dates and amounts while he read more transactions. Each one matched a board meeting where Claire had pushed some urgent funding motion. 240,000 total, Frank said finally. All since March. I lined up the evidence. Bank statements, highlighted transfers, board minutes showing Claire's emergency requests. Next to them, I placed the forged power of attorney and the notary documentation. It's all connected, I said. She needed my signature to access the main accounts. When I wouldn't give it, she made her own. Frank studied the timeline we'd built. 15 days until court. You know what this means? That my daughter's a thief. That you need your voice back. He tapped the court notice. All this evidence. It only works if you can present it. Stand up, take the microphone, and tell your story. I thought about that foundation meeting, Claire snatching my notes, silencing me in front of everyone. My hands clenched. The judge will give you time to speak, Frank said. Use it. Let the paper trail do the heavy lifting. After Frank left, I stood in my kitchen, facing the empty chairs. The clock ticked steady rhythm as I practiced out loud. Your Honor, I can prove 3 things today. My voice felt rusty. I tried again, stronger. First, this power of attorney is forged. Second, the notary verification is false. Third, foundation funds were diverted to a private account. I adjusted my tone, remembering how to command attention without shouting. Margaret always said I had a good courtroom voice, clear, calm, confident. I'd used it in dozens of contract negotiations. The phone's sharp ring cut through my practice. Thompson's number showed on the screen. Lawyers don't call after hours unless something's urgent. Would you believe my hand actually shook a little as I reached for that phone? Amazing how a simple ring can sound like either danger or salvation. I picked up on the third ring, Thompson's voice already speaking. Walter, we need to talk. I found something in the archived files you need to see. Thompson's news hit like a thunderbolt. He'd found the original property survey from when I first bought the land, complete with my signature from 30 years ago. Perfect comparison sample for the forgery expert. I'll bring it tomorrow, he said. First exhibit, followed by the certified copies, then your timeline of events. The judge likes things orderly. And Claire, her attorney, filed to cross-examine you. Be ready for that microphone, Walter. You know that feeling when you've prepared for months, but the night before still ties your stomach in knots? I barely slept watching the bedroom ceiling fan make slow circles until dawn leaked through the curtains. Frank pulled up at 7 sharp, his old Buick making that distinctive purr I'd know anywhere. Reminded me of fishing trips with him and Margaret, heading out while the morning mist still clung to the lakes. Got everything? He helped me load 3 banker's boxes into his trunk, each labelled in thick black marker. Originals, copies, timeline. Thompson's meeting us there. I settled into the passenger seat, my court folder on my lap. Says the judge runs prompt. The courthouse stood brick solid against the morning sky, same as it had when I'd filed my first business license there back in '72. Different world then. Everything on paper, signatures in real ink, deals sealed with handshakes. The marble steps hadn't changed though, still worn smooth by decades of anxious footsteps. Inside, the hallway gleamed with fresh floor polish. The coffee cart lady was doing steady business, paper cups and nervous energy flowing in equal measure. My watch showed 8:45. Courtroom 3, Frank said, shouldering a box. Thompson said it's down this way. The heavy wooden doors opened into that familiar atmosphere. Leather chairs, polished rails, flags hanging still in the air-conditioned quiet. A few early arrivals sat scattered in the gallery, flipping through phones or paperwork. The wall clock read 8:55. Good morning, Walter. Thompson met us at the plaintiff's table, crisp in his court suit. Everything's in order. The judge reviewed our filing package last night. I was arranging our exhibits when the back door opened. Claire swept in, wearing what looked like a brand new blazer, camera-ready makeup, perfect. 2 steps behind her came her attorney, and my chest tightened. A young woman with a reporter's notebook. Local paper, Frank muttered. She's playing to the audience. Claire caught my eye and gave that PR smile she'd perfected, the one that never quite reached her eyes. Morning, Dad. Hope you're feeling clear-headed today. Before I could answer, the bailiff's voice rang out. All rise. Judge Marion entered, efficient in her black robe. She settled behind the bench, glancing at her calendar. Denning Foundation matter, property transfer dispute. Are all parties present? Yes, Your Honor. Thompson stood. Walter Denning, plaintiff with counsel. Claire's attorney followed. Claire Denning-Voss, respondent with counsel. The bailiff stepped forward with his Bible. Raise your right hand. The oath felt solemn in my mouth, each word carrying the weight of everything that had led us here. I noticed Claire's slight frown when I didn't stumble over the phrases. Judge Marion checked her notes. Mr. Thompson, you've filed extensive documentation regarding chain of custody and the deed's history. Yes, Your Honor. We have the original survey and transfer documents, with certified copies and a chronological timeline of relevant events. Very well. She looked up. And Mr. Denning will testify? He will, Your Honor. The clerk rose, moving toward the witness stand. The microphone stem gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she adjusted its height. That little red power light blinked on, steady and waiting, just like that other microphone 2 months ago at the Foundation meeting. But this time no one could snatch away my notes. No one could silence my voice. The judge nodded. Mr. Denning, please take the stand. I stood, straightening my tie. Frank gave me a slight nod as I passed. 20 feet to the witness box, each step measured and sure. The polished wooden rail felt cool under my hand as I opened the gate. Here we go, I thought, settling into the chair. Time to let the truth speak. I settled into the witness chair and adjusted the microphone. Years of business presentations had taught me about projection and pace, but this was different. This was about truth, pure and simple. Please state your name for the record, Thompson began. Walter James Denning. Mr. Denning, could you tell us about the property in question? I nodded, letting my voice find its natural rhythm. I purchased that land in 1985, 38 acres on the north end of town, mostly woodland with a creek running through it. My late wife Margaret and I always planned to preserve it for the community. And what happened at the Foundation Board meeting 2 months ago? The memory tightened my throat, but I kept my tone steady. I had prepared a speech about donating the property as a permanent conservation area, but when I approached the podium, my daughter Claire, I gestured toward her table, grabbed my notes and told me, "Don't you dare speak." Claire shifted in her chair, her PR smile slipping just a fraction. She announced that I was confused, that I couldn't be trusted to make decisions. She declared the property would be sold instead. Thompson moved to the evidence table. Your Honor, I'd like to present Exhibit A, the power of attorney document Claire Denning-Voss filed to support her property. Transfer. He placed the first overlay on the document camera. My old mortgage signatures appeared on the screen, crisp and consistent. Then he laid the supposed POA signature on top. Note the irregular pen lifts, Thompson continued, particularly in this G. Our expert's report confirms these abnormalities. I watched the judge lean forward, studying the enlarged writing. Her eyes narrowed at the malformed loop. Objection, Your Honor. Claire's attorney stood. Lack of foundation. Overruled. Judge Marion barely glanced up. Continue. Thompson nodded. Mr. Denning, did you sign this power of attorney? No, sir. I've never signed any power of attorney giving Claire control of my affairs. Objection. Relevance. Claire's attorney again. Overruled. The judge's tone had an edge now. Thompson lifted another document. Exhibit B, the notary ledger from the date this POA was supposedly witnessed. The ID number here doesn't match state records for any active notary on that date. The courtroom fell silent. I could hear the wall clock ticking. Additionally, Thompson continued, we've prepared Exhibit C, bank records showing systematic transfers from the foundation accounts. Frank stepped forward with the financial packets. Thompson arranged them under the camera, highlighting dates and amounts. These transfers align precisely with Ms. Denning-Voss's board motions, requesting temporary liquidity measures. The funds were moved to this shell account. He circled an account number, which traces back to her personal holdings. Claire's attorney shuffled papers, but I could see sweat beading on his forehead. Judge Marion leaned back in her chair, fingers forming a steeple under her chin. She studied Claire's table for a long moment. Counsel, she addressed Claire's attorney, her voice cutting through the tension. Where is the original power of attorney Ms. Denning-Voss claims to hold? The question hung in the air like smoke. Claire whispered something to her attorney, who cleared his throat. Your Honor, we can provide certified copies. That wasn't my question. The judge's tone could have chilled wine. Where is the original document? He glanced at Claire, who had gone very still. We will need time to locate it among Ms. Denning-Voss's files. I watched my daughter's face, seeing that perfect PR mask cracked just slightly around the edges. The reporter in the gallery was writing furiously. The judge's gaze hadn't wavered. You filed a property transfer based on a power of attorney, but you don't have the original document? We can explain, Your Honor. I'm sure you can. Judge Marion made a note on her pad. But first, I have some additional questions for Ms. Denning-Voss about these financial transfers. Your Honor, Claire's attorney straightened his tie. The original power of attorney is in transit. We can have it delivered. In transit? Judge Marion's eyebrows lifted. From where exactly? My client maintains a secure storage facility for important documents, he offered weakly. We'll need to retrieve... You have until 2 o'clock. The judge's tone brooked no argument. Court will recess until then. The gavel crack echoed off the wood paneling. As we filed into the hallway, the morning's drama had worked its magic. 3 reporters huddled near the water fountain, notebooks out. A photographer from the local paper tested his flash against the marble walls. Ever since Claire's "Don't you dare speak" moment, I'd imagined facing cameras. Funny how revenge loses its appeal when that's finally within reach. Frank touched my elbow. Save your energy, Walt. Let's grab some lunch. We found a quiet deli across the street. I could barely taste the sandwich, my mind fixed on that red microphone light from the foundation hall. 2 months ago, Claire had stolen my voice there. Today, the truth was speaking for itself. You know that feeling when you've caught someone in a lie, and they don't know it yet. That's what I saw in Claire's face when we returned at 2. Her attorney kept checking his phone, probably praying for a miracle delivery. Counsel? Judge Marion settled into her chair. Do you have the original power of attorney? He stood, holding up a paper. Your Honor, we have a certified copy. A copy? The judge's voice could have frozen coffee. Let's see it. Thompson rose immediately. Your Honor, we have the notary's official log right here. He placed both documents under the camera. The differences jumped out on the screen. The notary stamps didn't match. The dates were off by 3 days. Even Claire's signature looked different between versions. Judge Marion studied them for exactly 12 seconds. I counted each tick of the courtroom clock. I've heard enough. She set down her glasses. The court finds that Claire Denning-Voss has failed to establish valid power of attorney over Walter Denning's affairs. Her attempted property transfer is hereby voided and enjoined. My shoulders relaxed for the first time in 2 months. Further, the judge continued, control of all relevant assets and accounts is restored to Mr. Denning pending final orders. Ms. Denning-Voss is to provide a full accounting of foundation transactions within 5 business days. Camera shutters clicked as Claire's face drained of color. She gripped the table, edge, knuckles white against the dark wood. The clerk will enter these decisions by tomorrow morning. Judge Marion gathered her papers. We're adjourned. The gavel fell one last time. Claire's attorney whispered something urgent in her ear, but she just sat there staring at nothing. All that careful PR polish had cracked, showing the panic underneath. The clerk's voice cut through the rustling of papers and squeaking chairs. Decisions will be entered by 9 a.m. tomorrow. You may obtain certified copies from the records office. Frank squeezed my shoulder as we stood. Well done, Walt. I watched my daughter's rigid back as she hurried toward the side exit, reporters trailing in her wake. That morning at the foundation meeting felt like years ago now. I'd walked in with a speech about community legacy. Instead, I'd learned how quickly trust could shatter. Mr. Denning? The courthouse photographer gestured to his camera. Would you like to make a statement? I thought about all the things I could say, about betrayal, about greed, about daughters who silence their fathers. But sometimes the loudest statement is letting the truth speak for itself. The court's decision says everything that needs saying, I told him. The property will be preserved, just as my wife and I always planned. The camera flashed once, catching the moment my voice became my own again. The morning after the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee when Frank knocked. He held up the courthouse envelope and the morning's newspaper. Thought you might want to see these together, he said, settling into the chair across from me. The clerk's order lay crisp and official, every word exactly as Judge Marion had spoken them. But it was the newspaper that made my hand pause on its way to the coffee cup. There on the front page, above the fold, Foundation heiress exposed, forged documents and missing funds. The photo showed Claire rushing from the courthouse, one hand raised to block the cameras. Below it, a smaller picture of me standing calmly at the witness microphone. They didn't waste any time, I said. Truth's got a way of running faster than lies. Frank tapped the article. They got hold of the bank records, traced every dime she moved. I skimmed the details. Forged power of attorney, mismatched notary stamps, shell accounts linked to foundation transfers. The reporter had done his homework, laying out Claire's scheme in clean, damning paragraphs. Somewhere across town, my daughter was probably watching her carefully built image crumble with each morning delivery. Ready to see the land? Frank asked. The drive took 10 minutes. As we pulled into the foundation property's gravel lot, I noticed they'd already mounted the new plaque near the trail entrance. My legs felt steady as I walked toward it, the morning sun warming my face. Remember how I told you about that gnawing unease, those first small betrayals? Watching documents disappear, hearing meetings scheduled without my knowledge. Now, standing before this bronze testament to truth, those memories seem to lose their sting. Well, would you look at that? Frank said softly. The plaque gleamed against its stone base, fresh mounted and perfect. My name stood out in raised letters, along with the dedication text I'd written months ago. My fingers traced the cool metal, feeling each carefully crafted word. A few yards away, a news van idled, its crew packing up their morning shoot. Their voices drifted over, something about fraud exposed and family foundation scandal. But those words felt distant now, like echoes from someone else's story. Traffic hummed from the highway beyond the trees, a steady rhythm that somehow sounded like approval. The salt, clean breeze carried the scent of early spring, reminding me of mornings spent planning this preserve with Margaret. She'd have been proud to see it protected, just as we'd meant it to be. Frank stepped back, giving me space with my thoughts. That's the thing about true friends. They know when silence says more than words. I stood there, one hand still resting on the plaque, and let it all sink in. The judge's order had stripped Claire's legal power. The newspaper had stripped her social mask. The double blow she'd meant for me, legal theft and public humiliation, had rebounded perfectly. But revenge wasn't what warmed me now. It was simpler than that. The truth had found its voice again. The last. Camera crew finished loading their van. The sound of doors closing, engines starting, wheels crunching gravel grew fainter until only the wind remained, just as it should be. The media circus would move on, but this land, this legacy, would stay. My fingers traced the final line on the plaque, words I'd chosen long before Claire tried to silence me. A man's voice is his legacy. Frank's quiet footsteps approached. Ready? I took one last look at E, my name in bronze, at the preserved land stretching out behind it. Yeah, I said, I'm ready.